My name is Mark, and it's my honor to share with you this movie, Strategic Air Command, with Jimmy Stewart. It's about the B47 Stratojet, the same plane that my grandpa flew. So let's check it out. Okay, I want to talk to you guys about this movie, Strategic Air Command, with Jimmy Stewart. Now, it's not as if it were a chore for me to talk about it. It happens to be my favorite subject. This movie is about the B47 Stratojet, the same plane that my grandpa flew. If you've been watching my channel, you've probably seen my Fogbound on an Icicle series, so you know that my grandpa's time in the Air Force was important to me. My grandpa, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Razor, and this movie is a very good representation of the Strategic Air Command and the stuff he was doing in the beginning of the Cold War years in 1955. In the earliest days of jet aircraft, the B-47 was actually one of the first mass-produced jet aircraft, and it was a nuclear bomber designed to be able to deliver nukes all over the globe in an effort to have a show of force during the Cold War times, So these were highly revolutionary, experimental, and futuristic aircraft of the time, so it's really a big deal. And in fact, you can thank the B-47 anytime you've taken a flight in a commercial jet aircraft, anytime in your life, you can thank the B-47 for helping the design and the development of all modern commercial jet aircraft, which is basically one long tube for the fuselage where the people sit, and then 4 jet engines on the wing, sometimes 2, sometimes 6. But it's a pretty important deal, and you guys need to know about it. So I'm going to go ahead and read the little summary on the back of the DVD for you. James Stewart and June Allison star in director Anthony Mann's Cold War aviation drama, Strategic Air Command. Robert Dutch Holland, played by Stewart, a successful player for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, finds his inactive duty status with the United States Air Force suddenly active. When Holland, originally tasked with a staff job, is promoted to commanding a B-36 bomber crew, his attempts to balance domestic life with Sally, his devoted wife, and service to God and country will test not only his marriage, but also his sense of self. And I would also add that it stars the aircraft, the B-36 and the B-47. Now this is really something to note, guys, is that all of the aircraft shown in this movie are real. There's no special effects. All these shots are real airplanes, and it just makes the whole movie that much more captivating. Not only that, but it's actually Jimmy Stewart flying the planes. Because some of you may not know that Jimmy Stewart was one of the founders of the Air Force and a real pilot himself. So when he's flying these planes in the movies, it's actually him flying the plane a lot of times. So that's a big deal for me, and I know some of you guys are like me, and you enjoy a good old movie with none of that stupid modern special effects that are in all the movies nowadays, and it's all overdone. No, this is real, down to every little nut and bolt on the planes. It's all real. And it's just thrilling, and it's important to me. So I highly recommend you guys check it out. And at this point, I've read the summary on the back, so that kind of tells you what's happening, but at this point I'm going to go into some more spoilers. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, go ahead and tune out now. And if you happen to be my cousin Jeremy or my Uncle Paul listening, go ahead and tune out now, because I'm going to send you guys a copy of this DVD, and I want you to watch it before you get it all spoiled by me here. So, okay, you've had fair warning. One thing that I really liked about this film is it provides somewhat of an explanation for why my Grandpa Frank ended up flying the B-47. Because for one thing, like Dutch, the character in the film, he really loved flying. So that was one thing that brought him back. And another thing, like the character in the film, Dutch, my grandpa was a B-24 pilot in World War II. And the same thing with the main character in this movie. So he was an old-timer, you might say, an experienced World War II pilot. Now in the year of 1955, they had to get called back into duty to fly these new jet planes. But they wanted old hands with lots of experience, not the young bucks, but old experienced pilots. So it was common that they would call back in some of their old vets who had lots of flying experience, you know. So that is one of the explanations to me for why my grandpa ended up flying the B-47. Many of the men were called back in, but there wasn't a war on, so they didn't understand why. But you see, SAC, which is short for Strategic Air Command, they had big plans to be prepared for anything. Basically preparing for the Cold War and making sure that we had sufficient air power to, you know, be able to protect our country. Another thing that is really apparent in this film is that Air Force life in SAC wasn't easy for family life at home. And there's lots of scenes between Dutch and his wife that illustrate that in this film. And then I think to my grandpa and grandma and what it must have been like for them. There's one scene where they're at the Air Force base, and every time a plane takes off, it shakes the housing that they're in because they're on base. And I thought, wow, that must have been what it was like for my grandma, married to a pilot. It was a tough life, you know. So Dutch, he really loves to fly, and they call him back in, and he takes the pilot position, even though they offer him just a command position. They offer him just to fly a desk and command, you know, the younger pilots. But he loves flying so much, and he's good at it. They say, like the general says at one point, you know, it's hard to find men that have his kind of judgment and coordination. And I think my grandpa was the same thing. He was an exceptional pilot. That's why they wanted him. But his wife in the film, and like my grandma, worried about him every time he goes up. Like every time she hears the planes taking off from the housing, and then every time the phone rings while she knows he's out on mission, it worried her to death. Another interesting thing is about halfway through the film, Dutch is flying the B-36, and it has an engine fire, and Dutch is forced to make a gear-up crash landing. In other words, a belly landing, which is the same thing my Grandpa Frank had to do in the B-24 in the Aleutian Islands campaign, and he came back a hero after that belly landing. So that was like one connection to my grandpa too. But you see, the B-47 was such a futuristic airplane. There's one scene when Dutch first sees it, he exclaims, "Holy smokes! I hope I can get my hands on one of those. It's the most beautiful and wonderful plane I've ever seen." And you have to imagine laying your eyes on the first ever jet airplane. It must have been quite a sight, you know. I mean, of course, there were other jet airplanes before then, but this was the first like major jet airplane in production and to be put into full-time use by the Air Force. So the film is really more than anything else, you could say the main premise is that it's about the tough decisions between family and loyalty to serve country. I mean, we get to see a lot of the planes, and that's a big highlight of it too, but really, most of what they're doing is just preparation. You see, the B47, as far as I know, never actually saw combat. It was all just preparation, in preparation for the Cold War. Yeah, Dutch ends up staying in the force, and he encourages a lot of the other men to stay in the force too, all the other old World War II boys who might have been thinking of getting out or who got called back in. And because Dutch is such a team player and such a well-liked guy, all the rest of the old boys want to stay in too. And I just remember my Grandpa Frank, I just think of him having that same effect on the team. Like, people wanted to work with him because he was just such a wonderful guy. The movie has a happy ending. Dutch gets a medical retirement due to a shoulder injury from the B-36 belly landing. So for Dutch, the character in the movie, everything works out fine. However, it was still a sad thing for him that he loved flying so much. He was disappointed that he didn't get to fly anymore. In my Grandpa Frank's case, being killed in a B-47 crash, he died a hero doing what he loved. So it was also a bittersweet kind of ending because although he died doing what he loved, which was flying, whereas Dutch lived and got medical retirement, but he was sort of sad the rest of his life because he didn't get to fly anymore. So it was kind of like the flip side of the coin there, see what I'm saying? But yeah, it really struck home for me, this idea of like war has a price, and my Grandpa Frank was a cost of that, a cost of keeping our country safe. Although his children had to grow up without a father, Frank will always be a hero. My Grandpa Frank, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Razor. You can think of him anytime you hear the roar of the jet engines overhead and you see a commercial jet airplane flying overhead. You can thank him for all of our modern jet aircraft because he helped develop them. So thank you, Grandpa Frank. He bought us our freedoms with his life and helped our country more than you'll ever realize. Every little thing that's been nice in your life in this country, yeah, there's some problems here and there, but for the most part, our life has been great in this country ever since World War II. And it was my grandpa and men like him that bought those freedoms for us. So thanks again, Grandpa Frank, and thank you, Jimmy Stewart, and to the people who made this movie. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys will check it out and gain a new appreciation for men who have bought our freedoms for us in this country. Bombers high, riding the air, every man doing his share. Men of war, better beware when the Air Force takes command. Ride the wind, follow a star, find the foe, strike where they are. Round the world isn't too far when the Air Force takes command.